Throughout our archaeological records, some historians have been unable to interpret or identify the origin of various artifacts, stories, and structures. Join us as we explore some of the most interesting unexplained mysteries from around the world. Today's video was done in collaboration with Down the Rabbit Hole. More on that later. Mystery of the Wisconsin Giants. A 19th century archaeological study of burial grounds surrounding the city of Madison showed that the state of Wisconsin might have produced something bigger than a few cheeseheads. August 10, 1891, the Smithsonian Institution reported that it found several large burial mounds on the shores of Lake Mills. In the 50 years prior to the discovery, many people who had settled the land have reported finding burial mounds all across the area. Many of these burial mounds contained abnormally large skeletons that were very similar to that of a human. The 1891 discovery provided historians with much more insight into the land's previous occupants. Researchers were able to excavate large structures that resembled that of primitive forts or defensive walls. From the evidence found in the area, historians and archaeologists were able to estimate that the land served as a home to around 200,000 people. But what makes this discovery so strange is that the population was likely that of a well-known Native American tribe that has long inhabited that area. The people of this tribe shared no physical resemblance to the giant skeletons found in many of the burial mounds. One of the Native American tribes were asked if they had any stories pertaining to the burial mounds. The researchers were provided with epic tales of a race of giants that used to live in cohabitation with their ancestors. The researchers disregarded the tales as they seemed to be based more in religion than science. The story was abandoned until a few years later when the Times decided to reinvestigate the anomaly. The research led them to Maple Creek, Wisconsin, where they discovered more giant skeletons. The only difference is these skeletons seemed to be much larger and also had 6 toes. At the time, archaeologists estimated that the bones were somewhere around 5,000 years old, and the artifacts buried near the bodies were of a similar age. Mysteriously, after such a discovery was made, almost all of the artifacts and skeletons went missing from the museum in which they were kept. Where the giant skeletons once stood, there are now regular-sized human skeletons. Before their deaths, the archaeologists and scientists of that time expressed their belief that the Smithsonian Institution covered up the discovery of the giant bones on behalf of the United States government. From time to time, people across the country claim to have come across bones that look to be of a human but much larger in size. Some skeletons have been found reported to be up to 9 feet tall. Unsurprisingly, these bones quickly go missing after discovery as well. Make sure to check out our video on the proof of giants. Chariots in the clouds. If you've been watching our videos for any length of time, you know by now that we have a bit of a soft spot for extraterrestrials and unidentified flying objects. Why modern science has not provided us with any definitive proof that we have been visited by aliens, ancient historical texts, and hieroglyphics might suggest that we once lived alongside these cosmic beings. Prior to the First Jewish-Roman War, Titus Flavius Josephus claimed seeing an army within the clouds. He described the scene that strongly resembled a story written in the book of Revelations about the second coming of Jesus. It is said that prior to his arrival, he would be preceded by an army of angels. This account alone might lead you to believe that Josephus was having an epileptic fit or hallucinating on a bit of holy water, but he was not the only person to have such a strange vision. The same time that Joseph had these sightings, there were multiple other eyewitness accounts of similar chariot-like objects in the sky. What is even more surprising is that these are not the first accounts of these chariots in the sky. Similar visualizations were reported during the Second Punic War and the Roman War against Mithridates. The consistency of what was reported by these separate cultures leads historians to believe that these groups might have all witnessed similar cloud formations to which they were unfamiliar. This is a plausible explanation since significant strides in meteorology were not made for another 20 centuries. This explanation might put the topic to rest if it weren't for ancient Hindu and Sanskrit texts from an entirely different part of the world that report somewhat similar vehicles floating across their skies. In these historical texts, the authors speak of giant flying fortresses where foreign beings that descended from the sky would live. These fortresses were called vimanas. From time to time, these beings would come down from the fortress and interact with the people, and the two groups formed some sort of symbiotic relationship. Even though the relationship seemed to be mutual, it looked as though the author of the text revered, worshipped, or feared the beings from above. Possibly the most interesting part about these strange flying machines are the amount of detailed diagrams of these vimanas. One of the most famous illustrations is of the Shakuna Vimana, which is said to have flown much like a bird using large mechanical wings. Across many cultures from South America all the way to Asia, similar flying machines have been documented in many ancient writings. It's enough to make you wonder if our ancient ancestors were once sharing cups of sugar with our extraterrestrial neighbors. Stone Spheres of Costa Rica. Sometime in the 1940s, workers for the United Fruit Company came across a strange find while harvesting fruit in the Costa Rican forest. While sifting through the brush, one worker noticed a giant, perfectly rounded stone ball sitting in the clearing. The workers knew that there were inhabitants on the island, but they were unaware that they were in that specific location. The prospect that there was a possibly hostile tribe of natives nearby was an unsettling feeling for the workers, so they attempted to finish their job as quickly as possible. As they continued to cut through the brush, they began to notice even more of these rounded stones, which did nothing but make them even more uncomfortable. It seemed the deeper they cut into the forest, the more stones they would find. Each stone was around 2 meters in diameter, and some weighed up to 16 tons. It has been estimated that the stones were made between 200 BC and 800 AD, with some of them, or ceremonial stones, being made after 1000 AD. The weight and the location of the stones was enough to draw the interest of archaeologists from around the world. Upon further examination, it was found that all the rocks came from a similar bed around 50 miles away. Much like the limestone and granite blocks, the Great Pyramids historians are unsure how the architects of these monoliths were able to carry these incredibly heavy stones such a long distance without the use of modern machinery. As you can assume, this has led to numerous theories that native Costa Ricans may have had contact with an alien race. What leads some people to believe this theory are the strange orientations in which these stones were found. Many of the stones were found deformed geometric shapes, with each stone representing a point or corner. In one case, the stones were aligned to point towards magnetic north. Many of the stones' layouts also happen to perfectly mirror astronomical alignments. It has also been speculated that a few of these stone groupings or navigational devices that provide the location of Stonehenge and Easter Island. There is a theory that many of these historic monolithic structures are connected in some form or fashion. Ancient vehicle tracks in Turkey. Soon after World War II and the advent of nuclear warfare, the world learned that humans had become evolved enough to be the reason for their own extinction. This led many historians and scientists to speculate if a similar scenario had occurred once before many millennia ago. A theory that would suggest that a civilization pre-existed our fossil records. Until the past few years, there was not even the slightest amount of evidence to suggest the possibility of such a civilization. Just a short time ago, a research scientist from the Natural Science Research Center at Moscow began to conduct studies in Pirgian Valley of Turkey, where a strange geological anomaly was found. Dr. Alexander Kultupin noticed that there were deep ruts or tire-like track marks within the fossilized volcanic ash. Kultupin, a tenured geologist, says that the markings are undoubtedly from a heavy object compacting the wet soil and ash beneath it. Much like dinosaur footprints, these markings were soon fossilized. The good doctor theorizes that these are actually prehistoric track marks from a civilization that lived long before humans, or possibly the track marks from extraterrestrial vehicles. Those who agree with Kultupin's theory tend to lean towards the idea that the marks are of extraterrestrial origin. So what leads him to believe that these are track marks from a vehicle and not just ruts naturally created by water erosion? He believes the consistent pattern and depth of the ruts is a telltale sign of the uniform layout of a wheeled vehicle. Also, these tracks cross each other in a perpendicular and diagonal manner quite often, which he believes contradicts the theory that these are simply erosion marks. The marks themselves are estimated to be somewhere between 12 and 14 million years old, which seems to be the only bit of concrete evidence Kultupin has been able to muster. While his theory may seem far-fetched, it is currently the only explanation for the strange fossilized markings in the Pirgian Valley. Other geologists who have observed the markings are baffled as to what could have possibly been their cause. Gate of the Sun. It seems most of the ancient unexplained mysteries have to do with scientists' disbelief in the upper body strength of our ancestors. Once again, we have a multi-ton megalith found in an atypical location. This one is called La Puerta del Sol, or the Gate of the Sun, which can be found near Lake Titicaca in La Paz, Bolivia. Structure is a single piece of carved stone in the shape of a doorway. On the top part of the doorway, there are 48 squares, 32 of which depict human faces and 16 which depict the head of a condor. In the center, just above the door frame, there is a figure that is believed to be the sun god. The structure is estimated to be around 1,500 years old and was discovered in 1903 by European explorers. When the structure is examined closely, it was determined that Lake Titicaca was likely not where the Gate of the Sun was carved. It was likely built somewhere else and then brought to its current resting place. This is what baffles many archaeologists, as this single-piece structure weighs over 10 tons and would be nearly impossible to move a long distance, even with an incredible amount of manpower. Researchers are still unsure where the Gate of the Sun was originally made, and they are equally unsure as to what its purpose may have been. The best theory so far is that the gate serves some sort of astronomical or calendrical purpose, possibly based on the 48-section depiction above the doorframe. These have been just a few unexplained ancient mysteries from around the world. As you can see, the nerds researching these artifacts had very little faith that our ancestors were able to do a bit of heavy lifting. Let us know some of your favorite unexplained ancient mysteries in the comments below.
16 mermaids caught on camera and in real life.
Number 16. Surbrok Cayman. In 2008, in the village of Surbrok in South Africa's Western Cape, a resident named Daniel Cupido and his friends were relaxing next to a river. At about 11:30 p.m. that night, they claimed to have heard something similar to somebody knocking on a wall. Cupido thought someone may be in trouble.